Now I would like to introduce Mr. Fadi Sidani, who is a managing partner at Governance Dynamics, who is gonna tell us about how e-government can combat fraud and corruption through analytics. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invite, Dr. Osman. And this is the second time this happens, so I feel very privileged to be here. And I would like also to commend AUB for taking on such a challenging topic that I believe is going to continue for many years to come. I'm not sure I chose a very wise topic to talk about in fighting combat and corruption in Lebanon, but I thought it would have been an appropriate topic to talk about. This matter has been going on for some time, and I'm not here to talk about politics or corruption at large in Lebanon. I'm here to talk about how analytics can help combat fraud and corruption. Before I start, I would like to note that this is, fraud and corruption is prevalent everywhere. So it's not Lebanon specific, it's everywhere. It's just when you're in the midst of it, you feel more pain than the rest of the world. We're going to talk a little bit about, for maybe a few seconds about who's governance dynamics, or what we do, data analytics, how data analytics work. I mean, we heard a lot of it. Just maybe another view, definition of corruption and fraud, and how are they perpetrated, some key statistics and analytics on how to combat corruption and fraud. We talk about something also called fraud risk assessment, and the challenges in implementing data analytics. So briefly, Governance Dynamics is a firm that I started recently based in Lebanon. I'm coming against traffic. Everybody seems to be questioning why they should be here, but I thought it would be a good way to come back. Been living outside for the country for around 28 years, and I started this business. It's focused basically on governance, and it really looks into governance, consulting, training, technology, and certification. So, and part of what we do is forensics, and I believe that governance is the source of all good practices. It's the brain of the corporation, and it's the brain of the government. If it works well, the rest of the body will work well. If it's damaged, everything else will be damaged. So if you deal with that, you're dealing with the root cause of the issues. You're not dealing with symptoms. So this is, I thought focusing governance would have been very appropriate. Just reflecting, I was just talking about the issues that relate to data. Data in their own sense are dumb information. It's just a lot of data. You just need to make sense of it. And I think the people who are behind the scenes will make sense of it are the people. So you need to have a data scientist, what they call them today, data scientists. And you need to have a theme. So if you want to start looking at corruption or fraud, you need to be purposefully looking for that. So it just doesn't dawn on you if you're running a big corporation that you want to deal with fraud and corruption. Without plans, it's not going to happen. So you need to have systems, practices, processes that will allow you to generate this data. So it starts with the access to explore data. Then you check the data to make sure that it's cleansed, it's appropriate, it's relevant, and they don't have false positives. And then you develop predictive models. So the models will give you potential indicators of what problems could be. And then you look into how you can, with the integration of the systems, whether these things would come out. Now, the idea here is that today's corporations, they do not, and bigger governments, they don't deal with fraud and corruption in a proactive way. Most of them deal with it in a reactive way. So they have policies and procedures and controls. But basically, most of these are done for good business. They are not designed to combat fraud and corruption. And you don't want the business to be totally focused on that, because that becomes a nightmare. It takes away the fun of doing business if this is the only thing you can think about. However, what you want to do is have some kind of indicators, red flags, that comes your way, indicate that something is likely to go wrong or has gone wrong, based on which you can carry out some investigations, okay? So it could be going through diagnostic approaches. So you could have an ERP system with special tools that would go about doing this. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail about that, but I would like to say that a lot of times the information or the data is already within your systems. It already exists. It just needs somebody to put it together, somebody to interpret it well. Sometimes you need a human resource expert to be with you to read for you, interpret for you. And don't underestimate the visualization impact. Or have, sometimes you tell somebody a story and you heard the word, the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. You just show them a graph, show them some stats, and they said, oh, whoa, I did not know it was that bad. So it saves a lot of time and lots of energy and convincing. It is obviously very cost effective and efficient, because the alternative way, if you have something going wrong, and most of the corporations, what do they do today? I mean, big government corporations, what do? They go to an expert, they're an external consultant. They pay, an arm and a leg just to make sure that your systems are okay, or to investigate it, okay? And this costs a lot of lots of money. Believe me, I've been a consultant for 28 years, and I continue to be a consultant. It's much cheaper to build it in, okay, and have smart people with the right relevant skills dealing with that, okay? Because consultants will always work within their scope, and they give you part of the picture. So they will not give you the nth level of detail, because that's not their mandate. So, just for the purpose of making sure that we are all aligned of what is corruption, and how do we define corruption? Corruption tends to deal with big societal or government issues. So, Transparency International defines corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. So, people in power, whatever their titles may be, okay, abuse their power. So it could be grand corruption, for the benefit of expense or public good. Sometimes it's just to maintain their power. Sometimes it is small, somebody making like, $1,000 here, down $1 there, because providing a service or more efficient service or bad service. Fraud, on the other hand, tends to deal more with corporate situations. So the Association of Fraud Examiners defines fraud as enormous representation of the truth or concealment of a material fact to induce another to act to his or her detriment. So for personal benefit or for corporate benefit or to get a higher bonus or whatever. So this could involve internal fraud, external fraud, and fraud against individuals. Now, I would like to say that at one point in time, it's the traditional types of frauds were, a good chunk of them were internal. Some of them were external, but they dealt with procurement or credit fraud, But today, fraud is becoming more and more prevalent with the cybersecurity situations that are emerging. There have been a lot of abuses now with all this data, sexy things that are happening. Private data, if not protected, could be used against you. And we have seen many situations here in Lebanon and overseas where people just basically use your data, steal your data, capture your data, and hold you against it. So you have to pay money to stop this information from being released to public. And we have seen in the Gulf, actually, some financial institutions have their clients' data, stolen, and the banks receive threats that this information will be released unless they pay. And many of them have actually paid, just because the confidentiality of the information is a lot more important to the bank than the money they would spend. So, this is, quickly, the corruption habit, there's always needs to be a human element. The thing is that the data does not deal with is the human element. So, but usually there's a corruption corrupt intent, where somebody wants to get a product or a service or a favor or an advantage over another, and they pay the money to somebody who's in a position to provide that service. And the way it works is that, traditionally, you give the money, plastic bag, delivered to the home or whatever, transfer bank, Swiss, give them a villa in somewhere outside the country. But I would like to say that this is typically the way it would, and will continue to work like that. But with the use of automation, things, and artificial intelligence and data, things could be predicted, So you can look into some of the red flags. Red flags are basically potential indicators of that something is going on that is wrong. And when you, these red flags could highlight sometimes what we call a false positive. It is not necessarily that something went wrong. It could have gone wrong, or sometimes you are misreading something that is not wrong in the right way. Government allows seemingly unqualified company to compete for and win. We have heard specifically, I have to say this when His Excellency here, we have heard tons of stories about certain contractors in Lebanon continue to win awards, over and time again, right? I mean, it doesn't require artificial intelligence to know that, but it's in the system. It's just, how many times did this person win an award, So I remember, you remember a similar case back in the Gulf for an airline. We're doing an audit over a review of an airline, and this had an outstation in France. And we're looking through through the documents. We noticed that this catering service and most of the services they get, the out service in France, tends to come from one vendor most of the time. I said it's very unusual. It's just, we did not have to go that far. It's not their biggest station, but it, asked me to, made me ask a question. And when we done that, we, said, well, what's going to this party? And then we said, is this party related to the airline? No. But then we found out through investigation, because the CFO asked that a further investigation be done. Turns out this is owned by the wife of the procurement manager at the French station, and who had access to all the insider information about the bids. So you always bid at a cheaper price, at a better quality. So with the analytics, you don't have to do this manually. It just highlights it. It shoots out a report and just say, okay, well, company A has won, the last 80% of the awards, okay? A company or individual with a history of controversy or criminal behavior competes for or wins an award. Again, a competing or winning company has a shareholder. So there are lots of situations, things that, sometimes you predict that are not going to happen, and they do happen. So there are many of these, which I will not go through, with regards to corruption. And fraud is if you will, a similar situation, but at the corporate level. It talks about check tampering, skimming, billing fraud, procurement fraud, employee fraud, non-confirm. A lot of these things could be produced so that reports could be produced so that the indicators could be read easily by the leadership and the internal audit department. So some of the indicators, employees have excessive financial difficulties, yet they are living they're living very well. Employees has a wheeler-dealer attitude. So many of these things, could be, some of them could be predicted through analytics. Some of them could not be read through analytics, but it does help a lot. So here are some of the highlights, with regards to corruption. Is that 70% of the corruption cases were perpetrated by someone who's in a position of authority. So I think this is something that is very interesting to note. And 50% of corruption cases were detected by a tip. So what does this tell you? That tells you that other 50% were not detected. So just, through a tip. I think using artificial intelligence could be the ultimate tipper for you, because humans tend to be concerned when they tip. About confidentiality, about my security, about my job, about my family, about this and that. But the system does not have these kind of concerns. Just to show here, just one slide, the $7 billion in total losses relating to corruption. So does it cost that much money to have artificial intelligence solutions within organizations and systems and governments? I think not. I think it's going to cost much less. And the value will be a lot more. So I'm going to skip some of the slides that we already talked about. So with data being open and big and available, it allows for a lot of good use and it allows for abuse. So for our purposes, it could be used in a proactive. This is what it could be a lot more valuable than being in a reactive mode, preventing bad situations from evolving, within the corporation. So this is a study that was conducted by OSEC, Ernst Young, and Tableau on corruption, and it showed how it's perpetrated and how things could get better with the use of analytics and data. So definitely there are, but it also presents certain challenges with regards to data. It's very important that data, when you use data, is that you need to make sure you have a purpose. You know how to go about it. Because, like I said, systems will not produce things on their own. They need to have a human brain, if you will, controlling them and directing them in the right place. And you need to make sure you have the data is cleansed and relevant and complete and accurate. So, and that is almost difficult most of the time, but it is the way to go moving forward. So in planning technology updates, I think this need to be taken into consideration very seriously. This is related to consultants mostly, but could be also relevant to organizations. The Institute of Internal Auditors talks about data analysis and technology enables auditors to analyze transactional data insights into operating effectiveness and controls and defines indicators of fraud. And this is the ISACA, which is the institute that relates to the IT audit. Data analysis coaxes order from the chaos, explains patterns which in turn help the enterprise identify problems before they spiral out of control. Okay, most of the problems have indicators before they develop into a really terrible situation. So some of the, how data analytics help combat fraud and corruption. It just highlights the indicators. It sets the things that you need to be focused on, and it allows for the required data parameters to be defined. So you're not working in an absolute space, and it also helps you understand whether or not the results that you are having make sense or not. So I think you need to use it with care, with a lot of care when you're dealing with fraud and corruption, because people's reputations are at stake. And there typically is a process around this, and need to be also recognizing that there are laws, labor laws, and other laws that may be relevant to that. I will speak about fraud risk assessment, and I will close. Basically, fraud risk assessment is an exercise that organizations do to determine whether or not they are exposed to frauds, what type of frauds they are having, and what solutions they need to have in place to combat these kind of frauds. So it's basically, they put some kind of scale, say we are most likely to have procurement fraud and financial statement fraud, and this is what we're going to focus on. So our budget for the year is going to be more focused on that. We're not too worried about employee fraud in some other areas. It just gives you direction. Now, with the data analytics, it makes this exercise much easier, much more recurring, and Actually, it allows for continuous fraud assessment versus being it a one-time off every 2 years. This is the process, and I would like to stop here. If you have any question, I'll be happy to take them later. We talked about the challenges earlier in the implementation earlier, but I think the one biggest challenge that one has is availability of human capital, is the people who understand data, interpret data, otherwise data scientists. I think these come from AUB, from Dr. Osman, right? Yeah? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fadi, for this presentation. And I believe that since you mentioned, and all your presentation was based on data analytics, it's very important to secure the data. And this is why I think part of our job will be to framework all the data protection. And this is part of what we've been doing in the previous law. And we're trying to integrate also the new GDPR regulation, that is the UE regulation, in order to be able to protect data, because as you know, we can, if we garbage in data, we get garbage out. So it's important to have good data and have a clean data. So thank you for this very nice presentation. Now